the New York Times at some level makes more money with a crazy bad take op-ed than it does with something really reasonable. What makes the news is precisely the least likely thing to happen. That's why it makes the news. We've been ready for a colorblind society for a very long time. To what extent is it helping a person who does not have the grades or the SAT scores to get into Harvard or Princeton? About 20% of Black Americans wanted less police in their neighborhood. 60% wanted the same police presence in their neighborhood, and 20% wanted more. 2020 was the largest one-year increase in homicide, arguably in American history. Race is not a good proxy measurement for poverty. Income is a good proxy measurement for poverty.
Welcome to the Quick Thought on Net podcast. My name is Tóti Hjartarson, and today I'm joined with Coleman Hughes. Coleman, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe to this channel. And for those Icelandic listeners listening, there's now a separate channel for my Icelandic content. So if you speak Icelandic, please go to Ein Pæling on YouTube and you should find it there. Now, if you enjoy this podcast very much, you can also support it by following the Patreon link in the subscription. Now, Coleman, I don't know if you remember, we met once in New York where you, me, and Camille Foster debated healthcare, and it was the Pangburn philosophy. Pangburn skipped his event, and everybody
That's
got
right.
$500. Do you remember this?
I do remember that. Yeah, Pangburn
Philosophy, I think.
he bungled the organization of that event, and then all these people who had paid for tickets to see, dozens of intellectuals debate really interesting issues suddenly came to New York. Some people had flown at $1,000 expense to come see this, and the event just didn't occur. So me and Camille and maybe a couple other speakers showed up to this replacement event kind of out of guilt, although we didn't get paid. We didn't get paid.
No.
So, but I felt so guilty. All these people had stories of coming so long, and I was able to meet some people, but I don't remember you specifically. That was a long time ago, and I'm not that good with remembering that kind of stuff, but it's interesting.
Now you're a thinker, a podcast host, a writer, and now a rapper.
Mm-hmm.
Were you a rapper before you started writing? Was it something that you intended to do, or did
Yeah,
it come afterwards?
I've been rapping since I was like 18 years old. I've been a musician since I was like 3. And so I was actually, I was a rapper doing shows in New York when I was like 18, 19, before I ever started writing. So the direction is actually the other way around.
All right. Well, we're not going to focus on music today, and to start us off on just how we accumulate knowledge. Now, there's no denying that in today's world we have access to more knowledge than ever before. However, it is worrisome the way in which we accumulate this information is creating sort of information silos and deepening our own biases and opinion. What are your thoughts on the current state of political discourse?
Yeah, so basically what's happened in my lifetime and yours is that the speed limit of information has increased by orders of magnitude. Back in, say, 2006, the way to get information was to read your daily newspaper, to go to the public library, to read textbooks in school, and to talk to people you knew, and to watch the nightly news. That was a very slow way of absorbing information, or rather of spreading information relative to what we have today. Back in 2006, if something happened in a random town in Idaho, I would not know about it right? I living in New York, for example, that would be local news that would come out the next day in the Idaho newspaper. It would have time for a reporter to look into it, look into the various perspectives on the event, and that's how you found out about information.
Hmm.
After social media, Facebook, Twitter comes online, and then after everyone has an iPhone, smartphone, if that same crazy event happens in Idaho, somebody films it on their iPhone, uploads it to Facebook, and within hours, it has millions and millions of views, not just in Idaho, but in New York, in Iceland, in, everywhere. That is a fundamental change in the way that our species relates to um, events, right? Like basically, it's as if overnight the speed limit on the highway was raised from 70 miles an hour to 7,000 miles an hour. But on the information highway, and that's created a lot of changes because it turns out that when you increase the speed limit of information, certain kinds of information spread much faster than others. So, for example, anything that is divisive, anything that plays to people's tribal identities, anything that leads people to be outraged, it travels much faster and much wider than anything that bonds people together, anything that appeals to reason, um, and anything that, you know, eh, lies spread much quicker than fact checks, for instance. And so the result of everything getting faster has been a deluge of information that causes us to hate each other and amplifies division.
Hmm. But why does it? I mean, and there's another variable to this. It's faceless communications. Basically, we have more communications on a faceless basis where we don't see the face of the one who we are speaking with.
Hmm.
But I wonder whether why is it that we are hating each other more just because of the speed? Is it because we don't like each other? Is it like is it just because we amplify the negative facts and news?
Yeah, so my argument is that when you increase the speed limit of information, certain kinds of information will benefit from that more than others. So like consider if you up the speed limit on the highway to 200 miles an hour, a Maserati or a Ferrari is going to be able to go 200 miles an hour, but a Subaru is going to keep going 80 miles an hour. It could never go that fast to begin with. So, by analogy, I'm saying like certain kind of narratives and certain kinds of information, narratives that play to your identity, your racial identity, your ethnic identity, your national identity, play to your sense of threat. When Facebook and Instagram and smartphones come along, those kinds of narratives and videos and stuff are going to spread way faster than fact checks and like things that lower the temperature because of human nature. Whereas in an earlier era, when all information traveled more slowly, um, the divisive narratives were on more of an even playing field. With the Ferraris were on more of an even playing field with the Subarus because none could go that fast. If
Hmm.
that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Do you think? No, I didn't write this down. Do you think having an enemy is a prerequisite to being human?
Having anonymity.
An enemy, sorry.
Oh, having an
An
enemy
yeah.
is a prerequisite to being human. Well, I think we are definitely very deeply wired for tribal conflict. We this is why we enjoy sports so much. Why enjoyment of sports comes incredibly naturally to children and to adults. because when you put someone on a team and you say they're the bad guys, these are the good guys, now do whatever it takes to win, that is a very natural thing to us. We don't have to learn it. We just know how to do it and enjoy it instinctively. And sports it's a proxy. It's a modern civilized proxy for what used to be war. Um, so is it a prerequisite to being human? I'm not sure I'd go that far, but I would definitely say it is something we are wired to do instinctively. And a lot of the reason why modern societies have become more peaceful over time is that we have channeled those urges into non-deadly activities like sports, as opposed to, um, you know, actually
Fighting it out.
just yeah, killing each other all the time.
Exactly. Yeah, this is, it's quite interesting. I really enjoy this analogy about the speed limit, and also it plays into this and this thing that the gravitational pull of a narrative to push people to the sides is getting stronger and stronger, and it's increasingly. And I even feel this temptation myself that sort of if you have a just prearranged idea about something, it is harder to change your mind because it is easier to find information that debunks that very thing that would otherwise make you change your mind,
Hmm.
if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah, it does. And another similar dynamic. This was it was a really good Atlantic article about this a few years ago by Yasha Monk, which covered a political science study. Basically, in America, they asked Democrats and Republicans what they thought the other side thought. So they'd ask Democrats, what do you think the average Republican thinks about immigration? And then they'd ask Republicans, what do you think the average Democrat thinks about immigration? And it turns out each side has a crazily exaggerated notion of what the average other thinks. So the average Democrat thinks that the typical Republican wants completely closed borders, not a single immigrant, even legally. And the average Republican thinks that the typical Democrat wants totally open borders, just migrants rushing over with no oversight or no due process. When in reality, the typical Republican actually wants no illegal immigration and moderate legal immigration. And the average Democrat wants um, something far more moderate than complete open borders. And part of the reason for that is the dynamic you're describing, where when we consume media on Facebook and Twitter, the algorithm feeds us that which is most likely to either enrage us or something we're likely to totally agree with. So if you're a Democrat, the algorithm is going to feed you nonstop the far right crazies that really don't want a single new immigrant. And you're going to get the perception that they are way more mainstream than they actually are, and vice versa.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the worrisome element to this is that Tristan Harris has covered this a lot, where there's no, I think, cynical force trying to push us to this direction. It's just based on pure economics. It's just so much more preferable for those Twitter, Facebook, all these massive social media companies to push us this direction because it keeps us looking at the screen. So finding
Yeah,
a remedy to this is very hard.
it's very hard. Um, Currently, most media outlets make money based on clicks and eyeballs and selling your attention to advertisers. There are still some that make money through subscriptions, like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, um, and the Atlantic, and so forth. But even the ones that make money through subscriptions also make a substantial amount of money through ads. If they don't pay attention to what gets us to click and cater towards that, they will go out of business. They will cease to exist and they will be replaced by organizations that do. That's just a fact. And I mean, I guess it has to do with how the internet originally was constructed. I think when the internet first was constructed, nobody thought to build ownership into it, or to build sort of property rights into it. So anyone can just visit any website free of cost, and so people had to figure out how to make money, and attention and advertisements is the way that emerged. Um, I mean, if there were something like property rights on the internet, which is what a lot of Web3 um, crypto people are hoping will emerge, then you can imagine the scenario being different. But this is a world that we've created, and I mean, in many ways, I don't know if you've ever seen this movie, and I guess it was a play before, called The Producers.
I haven't.
Yeah, well, it's like this famous movie I remember seeing as a kid, and there are these people producing a play or a musical, and at one point in the movie, they realize they can actually make more money somehow with a bad play than they could with a good play. And it's this crucial moment in the plot where the rest of the plot is them trying to game the system to make more money with a bad product than they could possibly with a good product. And in some ways, the modern mainstream media is in that exact place. Like the New York Times, at some level, makes more money with a crazy bad take op-ed than it does with something really reasonable. Because they don't care whether you're sharing and clicking because you hate it or because you love it. That is completely beside the point. It's orthogonal to their financial incentives in a way that it was not in 2005. If you get your newspaper on your driveway in 2005 and it has like 5 horrible takes, you may just unsubscribe,
Mhm.
right? Whereas today, with the way we interact with our screens, if I see 5 horrible takes from the New York Times, like so bad that I have to click and read, that is money in their pockets. So where are their incentives? They can really make more with a bad article than they can with a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. This is where incentivation goes bad and the optimization goes bad. And this is a fantastic point. And another thing to this is that it's a very contagious feature because, I mean, you see politics go in the same direction, where in which you don't have to persuade people based on your own opinion or your own the things that you want to do for society. But like for instance, Hillary Clinton in 2016, she ran her campaign based on, well, you might not like me, but at least I'm not him. And
Mhm.
it's sort of you're not only trying to push the negativity, you're trying to use it for your advantage as a politician. And I'm seeing this increasingly here in Iceland. I mean, I don't think the political climate is as bad here as it is in the States. However, I feel like every Western society is moving towards that direction, where in which you need to persuade people that his or her opponent is as bad as you claim them to be, and as they get worse, your position gets better. So we're basically throwing arguments out of the window. We're throwing everything that would make a good politician out the window, where you're not the worst person in the game.
Yeah, no, there's definitely some truth to that. I'm reminded of in America when Barack Obama ran against John McCain in 2008. And
Mhm.
many people on the more crazy parts of the American right were saying that Obama was not born in America. He was born in Africa, and he was a Muslim, which at the time would have been a death sentence for his political campaign, given that we were at war with jihadism. Obviously, that had no basis in truth. He was born in Hawaii, blah, blah, blah. And John McCain, to his credit, completely shut it down. He did not play to any of that element of the people that likely voted for him. He said, no, this is ridiculous. Barack Obama is an American. He was born here, and I respect him on that level. I just disagree with him for this, that, and the third reason. It was very civil, and maybe that speaks only to John McCain's character. Obviously, since time immemorial, politicians have been inventing lies about each other, have been totally nasty, have been doing opposition research and trying to, you know, locate any kind of personal ugly flaw that their opposition has. But it definitely does seem in the past few years in America, I can say the norm has generally been to be nasty, to demonize the other side as much as possible. Every election is it's said that if the other side wins, that will be the end of this country. Right? It's gotten to the point where the risks are talked about as if they're existential 100% of the time, and it's pretty exhausting and cynical and out of touch with reality.
Yeah, yeah, it absolutely is, and I mean exactly like you say, when your opponent is an existential threat, what will come next? I mean, you always need to apply a certain amount of skepticism to people's arguments. But I mean, I don't know how America can go through a few other election cycles when every time they want to try and convince the electorate that if the other person wins, they might not have a life anymore. It's absolutely crazy. But I want to change topics because you think a lot about justice in America. Is America a just society?
I would throw the question back to you. Compared to what?
Compared
I,
to 20 years ago?
yeah, I think America is a more just society than it was 20 years ago. I think that I can say with confidence. Um, is it a perfectly just society? No. I also think that question would be nonsense because there never has been nor ever will be a perfectly just society so long as humans are as fallible as we are. But I think people vote with their feet, and America remains one of the most popular places to migrate to, if not the most popular place to migrate to in the world. And insofar as that says anything about the preferences that people of the world have, that would suggest that America is one of the more pleasant places to start a life. That
Mhm.
doesn't mean America's perfect, but yeah, I mean, I think we have um, we have principles that we practice imperfectly, but that point in the right direction on most issues relating to justice.
Mhm. What do you think needs to happen in order for American society to become more just? Is there something that you can put your finger on? So just like, yeah, if we would do this one thing, things might get exponentially better.
No, I'm afraid I don't really have any solutions that are that simple. Um, I'm not, yeah, I mean, I think that there are a lot of small things we could do to bring America more in line with my principles. I think overall we should have far more race neutral policies and focus more on class based policies than on race based policies. That is one of my major arguments, I would say. That would make things marginally more just in this country. But that would not be a cure all, certainly. Yeah.
So do you think? So do you think that America is ready for a colorblind society? So if you, yeah, sure, we would put some emphasis on class, but I mean, someone might say that well, African Americans own 1/10 of what white their white peers own. So of course we need to be we can't be colorblind due to that fact.
Yeah. So what I would say is, um, I mean, we've been ready for a colorblind society for a very long time, in my opinion. In fact, the whole concept of being ready for colorblindness is a little bit backwards. Colorblindness was what the American Anti Slavery Society was asking for in the 1860s, a colorblind government. In fact, Wendell Phillips used those exact words. The 14th Amendment that he proposed was supposed to implement a colorblind government. That is, a government akin to what France has, which is that you literally cannot make any distinctions on the basis of race. That's exactly what A. Philip Randolph asked for when he created the March on Washington movement in the 1940s. It's exactly what the NAACP asked for in their Brown versus Board of Education briefs, which is a government that cannot make any distinctions on the basis of race for any reason. We were ready for it then. It just so happens that compromises and pragmatism prevented that from ever being implemented in the United States. Um, almost all of the race-based policies, the color-conscious policies that we've implemented since the 1960s, from affirmative action to set-asides to diversity programs, overwhelmingly benefit individuals that are already economically privileged, but simply have the right skin color. We've had race conscious policies ubiquitous in American life for 50 years. And um, and so we've been living in this era a very long time. And those gains have largely been captured by people like myself, Black people and people of color like myself that didn't really need the help. If you look at who goes to Harvard University, right? Who are the Black kids at Harvard University? Overwhelmingly come from economic privilege, and disproportionately are the children of immigrants, Black immigrants, recent Black immigrants to this country. So this is a problem, which is that if what you're concerned about is the racial wealth gap, the 10-to-1 racial wealth gap, or economic disparities in general, if what you're concerned about is poverty and the disadvantages that flow from it, perfectly valid thing to be concerned about. Race is not a good proxy for that problem. Race is not a good proxy measurement for poverty. Income is a good proxy measurement for poverty. So any program implemented that doles out advantages based upon race is using a bad proxy measurement for the thing that you are claiming to care about, namely poverty and the disadvantages that flow from it.
Mhm. And there's another thing to this is that when you allow people to get a leg up at every step, and I mean I listen to every Glenn show. This is something they have been pointing out for probably a decade or more, is that when you give people a leg up, they are increasingly in a worse position to take on a job that they will need to do in the aftermath of finishing their education. So if you always just provide them with help and they don't have to have the same grades as their white peers, they are on average in a worse position to do better in life.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that can be true sometimes. So, for example, Black Ivy League students are far more likely to graduate in the bottom 20% of their class than their white peers. I think Raj Chetty showed that in a study. Um, to what extent is it helping a person who does not have the grades or the SAT scores to get into Harvard or Princeton, to put them there so that they can be in the bottom 20% of their class, feel outclassed every class that they're sitting in by their peers, and then have a whole have people notice that the black kids in class are towards the bottom. I'm not sure that it's obvious that that's helping. There's also been evidence that there was a paper done on at Duke University where it looked at what kids wanted to major in on day one of college and what they ended up majoring in by the end. And it found that there was a much higher attrition rate of black students wanting to major in sciences on day one and then going to an easier major, um, which suggests that when you admit a group of people with lower qualifications, they are more likely to get into a science class, chemistry class on day one, realize that the class is moving faster than they're capable of, and then switch to an easier major. Whereas if without affirmative action, that same kid at a good state college where they were at the median of their class could have graduated with a science degree, gone on to have a perfectly good career. So it's not, it's not obvious to me that you are helping someone um, by just sending them to a school where they're going to be towards the bottom of the class.
Yeah. Now, probably some Icelandic people will tell me now, like, well, all right, Tóti, you found the one black guy who agrees with you. Of course, you're gonna have him on, and of course, you're gonna try and persuade people of your ideas. Well, we know that America is a racist society. African Americans are still behind on every measure. So why don't you want to try and help them? What would be your response to that? Because at least here in Iceland, and I personally think this is a quite racist position. Icelandic people tend to think that African Americans in America think exclusively one way, and it is by the same narrative I was just speaking of.
Yeah, I mean that's again, that is a product of the media. I African Americans vote one way, but we don't think one way. That's one of the biggest, I think, misconceptions. That because 90% of black people vote for the Democratic Party, that therefore 90% of black people roughly agree with left wing policies. So, for example, I would love to ask any Icelandic person to answer this question for me. I'm sure you all paid attention during 2020 to the murder of George Floyd and
Hmm.
to the worldwide protests that resulted and riots that happened in American cities and so forth. Defund the police. I'm sure this is a slogan that your listeners are aware of.
It was a
What
slogan
percent?
in protests here. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, yeah, they were right. That's right. So I would love for anyone who resonated with your critique to answer this question mentally. What percentage of Black Americans do you believe want less police in their neighborhood? If you were a casual observer of the media about America and you believe that the Black Lives Matter movement speaks for the majority of Black people, and you think that I am some cherry picked Black person that you know doesn't represent any proportion of people of my race, then you're probably going to guess a pretty high number. The real number during 2020, when Gallup, which is our best polling organization, asked this question, the real number was 19 or 20%. It was about 20% of Black Americans wanted less police in their neighborhood. 60% wanted the same police presence in their neighborhood, and 20% wanted more. So that means roughly 1 in 5 Black people agreed with the perspective of BLM to diminish the police in their own neighborhood. So I would put that question back to people. Why is it that someone like me, whose opinion on the police presence in Black neighborhoods would be agreed with by roughly 80% of Black people, is cast as a minority viewpoint?
Hmm. Yeah,
And
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 this is
BLM, and then why is BLM cast as somehow speaking for a critical mass of Black people? It's utterly absurd, and it's a product of ignorance and media bias.
yeah. I mean, I have heard you make this point before, and when I tried to tell people that in much softer terms than you did just now, I was immediately slammed as some kind of a horrible person who was not sympathizing with the horrible murder of George Floyd. And the hard thing about this, especially with something as emotional as race relations and policing in America, it's it's so hard to form an opinion somewhere in the middle and get listened to, because we sort of just have to have it either way. And this is not just particular to America. This is also here in Iceland. When people were discussing this issue, it
Mhm.
was sort of like either you are with the police or you're with George Floyd and BLM. Now pick a side.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very unhealthy way to approach it. Um, Obviously, you can both see the necessity of the police. The police are necessary. Um, it is unwise and deeply unpopular in the Black community to defund or diminish the police, which is why every local constituency has backed off. Politicians have backed off defund because of pressure from the Black community, which suffers from crime the most and therefore needs police the most. You can
Isn't
say
there
that while
also sorry, isn't there also empirical evidence that homicide has gone up in those very societies that defunded the police?
so in 2020 was the largest 1 year increase in homicide, arguably in American history, and um, certainly in the past like 100 years. So it's the biggest percentage year over year increase. There's a good Pew article about that if you want to check it out, but that's in many places. I haven't seen a breakdown of where homicide has gone up correlated with specific defund policies being implemented, but homicide has gone up everywhere, and it was not a coincidence, and it was not because of the pandemic, because the pandemic happened to the whole world, but homicide only went up in America, or certainly only went up by the amount that it did. It was because of the essentially the BLM protests and riots. The riots increased homicide directly. There was a pulling back of police all around the country. But just to finish out my point from earlier, you can say that the
Mhm.
police are necessary and that Black high crime communities, which are disproportionately Black, need police more than actually the rest of us do. You can say that while at the same time acknowledging that uh, there are serious problems with the police. The police abuse people, they brutalize people, sometimes they kill people unjustifiably, and they've done that a lot throughout recent American history, and they have gone unpunished for it far too often until recently. Until 10 years ago, police basically didn't go to prison for anything they did, no matter how bad. It's actually hard to find a single example of a cop, pre like 2013. You can just go through the examples of cops like killing kids, whether by accident or on purpose or whatever. They never got punished. almost never. Now cops are getting punished for doing bad things. And by the way, not all the kids the cops killed are black, right? There's a lot of examples of this. Is also something people, casual observers, don't know. As an experiment, I just took a single year. I picked a random year, 2015, in an article I wrote called Stories and Data for City Journal. And I listed 10 different unarmed white people that the police killed that year. One of them was a 6-year-old child. None of those names are names that, um, you know, typical,
Known. Yeah.
yeah, names that are known because the media never talks about them. But the problem is deeper than race. It's about police accountability mainly, in my view, and uh, that problem has improved as a result of the BLM movement. And I think that's one thing, maybe the only thing that the movement can really claim as a success.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that the temperature of the discourse, because I mean, you have the thin blue line, you have the Blue Lives Matter movement as a counter to the Black Lives Matter movement. Do you think the amount of just hatred on each side of the other side is something that is just obfuscating the discourse so much that we can't get ahead, we can't go beyond the horrible things that are happening, and we cannot implement policies that will make them better because of the hatred of the other side to the other side? If you get one,
Well,
if you get my question.
definitely, yeah, it definitely doesn't help. It definitely selects for politicians that are less compromising and more extremist. So yeah, I mean, we are. It's not a healthy situation that we've stumbled into here, um, and like this goes to the point before. The Blue Lives Matter people are getting in their news feeds all day, every day, the worst of the anti-police rhetoric on the BLM side. And BLM supporters are getting the very worst of the behavior of the cops pumped, mainlined into their consciousness. And this creates just you know, a an amplification of both extreme viewpoints, that the cops are perfect on the one hand and that the cops are, evil.
Yeah, and that they're victims. It's
Hmm.
that's when you have victims on both sides, it's much
Hmm.
easier to persuade people that the one that is the perpetrator in that situation is something that is happening all the time. I really, it's a very good point, because I mean, I've seen the compilation of the police shootings of African Americans, and I've seen the compilation of um, criminals killing cops in just ludicrous situations.
Hmm.
And it's really hard to come out from that without your own biases. I mean, when after I see African Americans getting killed by police, you are very persuaded by the Black Lives Matter argument. When,
Hmm.
however, you see the compilation of police getting killed by just showing up in a 911 call and not coming home to their families, and you know that, it's really hard to not being persuaded by the Blue Lives Matter movement.
Yeah. Well, they both have points. Um, I mean, the point the BLM movement has is that, um, some, American cops have been too trigger happy and have killed people in situations where the person did nothing wrong, right? Complied with every order. And it's galling to watch somebody get murdered essentially for obeying a cop's order, unarmed or armed with a license to carry, with a perfectly legal license, informing the cops that you're pulling out your legally owned gun, as is like whatever, as is protocol. And so it's horrible to watch. And when it's a white cop doing it to a black suspect, it's difficult not to come to the conclusion that it's racist, even if I show you 5 or 10 videos of cops doing the exact same things to white people. For an American mind, it's difficult to not call to mind those images of civil rights protesters getting hosed down and all the rest.
Hmm.
The point that Blue Lives Matter has is that being a cop is an incredibly dangerous job. It is, and it's a dirty job, and it's a job that keeps the rest of us safe. It's a job that is incredibly easy to Monday morning quarterback, as the phrase goes, to say from the safety of my apartment where I never have to deal with any violent people, to say the people who have chosen the job of dealing with the violent people so we don't have to, when they mess up, when they mistake a wallet for a gun, to say, well, it would have been so easy for me to determine in that situation that the wallet was in fact a wallet. I would have done a perfect job if I were the cop. How dare he? It is utterly absurd and hubristic for people that have never done the job to suggest that it's easy and that it's totally easy to not make mistakes, even deadly mistakes sometimes. Something like 300 cops get shot per year, which is quite a lot, and so they have a point as well.
Hmm. Are you persuaded at all by Larry Elder's point that if you just keep your hands at the steering wheel, say yes sir and no sir, and you don't do anything rash, you'll get on fine. It's just because the perpetrators are always acting in a wrong manner. And if Obama would have said that in 2015, I don't think when Ferguson was happening, we would live in a much better society. Are you persuaded at all by that point?
Well, it's true 99% of the time. People don't realize there are like, how many arrests are there every year? Like there are,
Millions.
yeah, or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. I mean, the vast majority of them go off without a hitch, without a problem. Um,
Yeah, I
but
think the
there,
arrests are in thousands, but just police
ten
attention
thousand.
is in the millions, probably.
Yeah, right, right. So the point is, there are these rare exceptions that get pumped into our social media feed of people complying with every single instruction and still getting shot to death.
Mhm.
So what do we make of that? Do we think that do you say that that's likely just because it's showing up in your social media feed? Well, no, that's like that shows a basic ignorance about statistics. Like what makes the news is precisely the least likely thing to happen. That's why it makes the news. When somebody gets struck by lightning, it makes the news not because it's likely to happen to you, but because it's so rare. So, on the one hand, I don't want to say that it's impossible that if you comply, say yes sir, no sir, um, that you'll get shot because it's happened. We've seen it on video to white people and to black people, and it's gruesome. It's horrible to watch. But at the same time, it's extremely unlikely. It really is as likely as getting struck by lightning if we're talking about the numbers. I mean, we're talking about something like, you know, less than 100, much less than 100 unarmed Americans each year getting killed by the cops. It's been like 40 or 50 in recent years. That's right on the order of the number of people that get struck by lightning every year or get like killed by bee stings. Um, it's very unlikely to happen.
That's very interesting point. That something rare does make the news because it is rare, and it's something that people ought to think about more. But Coleman, we need to stop in a few minutes. But I have a final question for you, which you can answer in however many minutes you want. What is the most positive thing that has happened over the past few years in America?
The most positive thing? That's an interesting question. Um, I don't know if I can answer that. I mean, what is the most positive thing that's happened? What's the most positive thing that's happened in Iceland? You tell me.
Well, um, some might say the Me Too movement. I mean, we have started the discourse about how relations between the sexes is something that we ought to take a look at. I have in on this podcast been critical of the Me Too movement, but one might argue that the impact, at least of the discourse, because I regardless of what people think about any of these topics, I think discourse and rational thinking is the best way forward. So, however we discuss it, or not however we discuss it, but whatever is being discussed, I think discourse is always the right path to go. So, I took the Me Too movement. You could have taken that ball yourself, but now you have to pick something else.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't. I'm not sure I really have an answer. Like, what's the best thing that's happened in the country in the past few years? I really struggle to think of any trends that are. Here's the thing: the good things usually happen slowly. The bad things happen all at once, right? Like the good trends in America are trends of, well, until 2020, declining crime, declining incarceration, increasing education. All the graphs on these questions were going in the right direction. Besides a kind of a blip of the opioid epidemic, we've had an increase in life expectancy over the past many decades. But that's not like one event. This is one of Steven Pinker's points in Enlightenment Now. Good trends aren't newsworthy because they don't happen all at once, whereas a building collapsing is an event. A riot
Mm.
happening is an event. A murder or a series of mass shooting is an event. A slow decline in crime and homicide in general is not an event. So I would say what the good things that have happened in America have happened slowly, day by day, over the course of the past 50 years.
Do you think that that point lacks attention? Do you think it is getting harder for us to make progress because it's so hard to grasp?
I don't think it's becoming harder to make progress. We're making progress all the time. Life is getting, people are living longer, dying from disease less. Um, the economy grows every year, giving people, average people more time to do things. Um, products become cheaper. There are certainly many ways in which we're not making progress, but overall, I don't know anyone who doesn't have a better, more opportunities in life than their grandfather did, for example.
Hmm.
It's very hard to think of someone who talks to their grandfather and says, "Man, I really envy you growing up in 1950." Um, so that intuitive fact alone suggests that we've made progress, and it's just that most people don't really want to acknowledge that, and that's what Steven Pinker, for instance, and Hans Rosling, and all the people that highlight progress have, the backlash they've run into in the intellectual community.
There you have it. Things are getting better. Don't worry. It's nice to end on a positive note, Coleman, and I really enjoyed this interview. Anything? Where can people find you?
You can find me
Not
on Twitter.
physically, but but you're yeah.
Yeah,
Go on.
don't come to my apartment. Um, you can find me somewhere in New York City that I will never tell. Or you could find me on Twitter at coldxman and at colemanhughes.org.
Very good, Coleman. Thank you so much for joining me. And until next time.
Thanks so much.